You would have heard about the Commonwealth Games, you would have heard about the Asian Games, and of course, you would have heard about the Olympic Games. But how many of you knew about the Indian Olympic Games, now known as the National Games? Hello and welcome to the Express Sports Pod. This is game time, and this week on the pod, we are going to talk all about the 36th National Games and the different facets to it. And to do the heavy lifting for most parts of it, I, Rahul Pandey, have with me my co-host Mihir Vasavda. So Mihir, let's dive straight into it because we've got lots to talk about. What are the national games?
Just imagine the Olympics and imagine again that it's just Indians taking part in it. Those are the national games. So you basically have a host city, a bunch of venues, around 30 odd sports. And so it's state going head to head against another state, as is the case in the Olympics. The team that has most number of medals, most number of gold medals, eventually is declared the winner. So that, in a sense, is the national games. The relevance of these games through the next 20-30 minutes थोड़ा सा एक अंदाजा हमें आ ही जाएगा कि कितना रेलेवेंट है ये मॉडर्न कंटेक्स्ट में. Look, there are two aspects to it. The games as a concept are very interesting. They are critical perhaps for the overall growth of Olympic sports, and India gives opportunities to many people, not just sporting opportunities, even job opportunities and chances to set their lives. So in that sense, national games are kind of important. But the manner in which they've been conducted, ना वो वहाँ पर एक जरा issue आ जाता है. So 2015 was the last time these games were held. Now 2015 was when it was conducted in Kerala. Kerala was actually supposed to hold it a couple of years earlier. They couldn't do it because, well, multiple reasons. As always, there were delays in constructing venues. There was lethargy on the side of the Indian Olympic Association, who are responsible to deliver these games. So the event eventually took place in 2015. Now, the actual host for the 2015 National Games was Goa, and they were like miles behind it. I mean, it's almost like they were waiting for 100 years to get their stuff sorted. 2015 Goa was supposed to host the games. That got pushed back at least 3 or 4 times because they couldn't get venues constructed. They didn't have the budget. एक बार आपका जब ये delay start हो जाता है, then automatically the budget gets inflated. So once the budget got out of hand, they didn't have the money to invest in the infrastructure that was required for these national games. Eventually, the pandemic came about, and Goa was unable to host the games. So we're talking about something that was to be done 7 years ago. They weren't able to do.
But for all the time that it didn't happen, 7 years almost, when it did happen, the preparations for it were done inside a time span of less than 3 months. And Gujarat got to host the national games. But how did this come into picture? How did they come into picture? And how did that happen so fast?
So suddenly around June this year was when Gujarat thought of this as an idea. They pitched it to the Indian Olympic Association, who were anyway begging is a strong word, but well, they didn't have any other option. So they were literally, koi bhi agar jo aa jata at that moment to rescue them, they would have perhaps taken it. It just happened to be the case where Gujarat came over. They said, we have venues, we won't be constructing new venues, just we'll refurbish the existing ones and we'll get it rolling. And in the span of 3 months, like you mentioned, I think little less than 3 months for most venues, Gujarat refurbished their stadiums in 6 cities. Those are Ahmedabad, Gandhinagar, Rajkot, Bhavnagar, Baroda, and Surat, and made it games ready, hosting 15,000 people approximately, of which 7,000 odd were athletes. The rest were all technical officials, coaches, and other staff related to the games.
Wow. The scale of it is mind boggling at the moment. And there's, of course, another figure which is mind boggling about which we are going to talk about. You spoke about budget, and the budget for these games, that is the 2022 national games, is a whooping 2,000 crore Indian national rupees. Now, such an insane amount of budget for a tournament, for a multi sports tournament that was organized in a span of less than 3 months. It's insane. But at the same time, there are multiple angles to this, aren't there? So Gujarat at this time of the year is anyways the place to be, but Navratri isn't the only thing it has in the offering for all of us right now in 2022. The national games being held, and there are two side stories to these national games. One is, of course, the Gujarat Assembly elections, and the other one, as we mentioned before, these games were previously known as the Indian Olympic Games, and it's only quite poetic to say that in 2022, when these games are being held in Gujarat, there is mention of a Summer Olympic Games or probably presentation of a state, a city in order to host an upcoming Summer Olympic Games in 2036. That is. So, yeah, let's talk about all those things wrapped up into the 2022 National Games.
So the Olympic Games first. 2036 is the earliest when a free slot is available for a country to host the Olympics. As we know already, 2024 is when Paris will be hosting, then it moves to Los Angeles in 2028, Brisbane in 2032. The host for the 2036 Olympics will be decided in the coming years. The process will start in 2025. Now, Gujarat has been seriously considering to host the Olympics. In fact, so serious that the state's attorney general during High Court hearing in April mentioned that the government officials as well as the state's Olympic Association officials have been in touch with the International Olympic Committee, who will be visiting Gujarat in 2025 to see the readiness for the games. So they're seriously considering it. And what makes it also interesting is that Gujarat has proposed to be a multi city event like the national games right now. It's something that hasn't really been tested at this scale at the Olympics. So, in that context, the national games was a testing ground for Gujarat to see whether they can host around 10-15,000 people at one go, whether they have the infrastructure in terms of the roads, hotels, transport, etc., to ferry them from one place to another. Also, the technical expertise to pull something like this off. Now, we'll of course be touching upon these aspects later on, but this was one of the backdrops in which these games are being held. The other, of course, you mentioned were the elections. Now, Rahul, I mean, it isn't subtle. The moment you reach Gujarat, I'm not talking just about Ahmedabad. The Team Indian Express has been to multiple cities across Gujarat, including Surat, Bhavnagar, Gandhinagar, Ahmedabad. We covered 4 out of the 6 cities. Everywhere we went, the common theme was that the entire city was basically decorated with posters of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, Gujarat Chief Minister Bhupendra Patel, and they were omnipresent, be it right when you reach an airport or a train station or a bus stand, be it the city center, malls, restaurants, of course, the stadiums, the hotels, wherever you went, their pictures were there. And the messaging was pretty clear what was happening over there. Gujarat elections, assembly elections in Gujarat are supposed to be held anytime now. You read reports, it's clearly said that by December, the entire process will be over and you have a new chief minister, a new government, or the existing government might continue. Who knows? But the elections will be done by December. So everything that was happening on ground was in a way also trying to push the election angle to it as well. Maybe not direct, but it wasn't certainly subtle.
Gujarat, anyways, isn't subtle, as we mentioned during Navratri days. And speaking of Navratri, there was quite the color around one particular athlete, and let's just not say one, but two of them. Neeraj Chopra, PV Sindhu, both of them not participating in these games, but there was just so much of fan craze around them attending these games before the inauguration. I mean, that Neeraj Chopra video that surfaced on social media last week, insane number of people chanting his name, and just the way he was received by those people. And it all mixed together pretty well ahead of the games. And it was sort of an opening ceremony act in itself, I'd say. How was it for you to experience, or did you get the opportunity to watch the many side stories that developed at the national games when it comes to featuring Neeraj Chopra?
Yeah, and there are a couple of cool stories. First of all, I mean, Neeraj Chopra and PV Sindhu were a few of the stars who missed the games. The Indian Olympic Association had made it mandatory for every Indian athlete to take part in these games, but So in Neeraj's case, he didn't want to risk an injury because he's just coming off one. And in Sindhu's case, she is undergoing rehab. So she didn't want to risk that either. So both of them opted out of the games. What followed was basically more grueling than their competitions itself because they landed in Gujarat one day before the opening ceremony, which was held on September 29th. From September 28th, when they reached, till I think it was at least till October 2nd, if I remember correctly, they were just everywhere. I mean, if you take Neeraj's schedule on September 28 and 29, Rahul, 28 को वो पहुंचता है अहमदाबाद around afternoon. He goes off to this school which is backed by the RSS. Had the first event which set the ball rolling for the national games. It had a sports conclave. So Neeraj, immediately after landing in Ahmedabad, was taken to the school which is kind of in the outskirts of the city. From there, he was driven a couple of hours in the evening to Baroda, where he participated in a Garba event. He spent the night there. Next morning, he was driven a couple of hours again to Gandhinagar, where he had an interaction with his fellow athlete, Murli Sri Shankar, at the IIT campus, I think it was. From Gandhinagar, he was then taken to Ahmedabad, where he had to do some other photo ops, Sabarmati River, and stuff like that. From there, he was taken to the opening ceremony where he shared the stage with Prime Minister Modi as well as Sindhu and other athletes. In 24 hours, that was quite a lot of travel, quite a lot of dancing, especially for Neeraj. So, that of course was one aspect to it. The other funny bit, if you look at it from a crowd point of view, no doubt Neeraj is a crowd puller. I mean, I think we'll play this clip over here where you'll hear how the fans. I think it's best to hear it from on ground. This clip from Baroda where the love of the fans is apparent. This video, this chants, basically, they're taking place post midnight in Baroda. And yeah, I'll just let this play before I explain what this is for the listeners if it isn't quite apparent. So yeah, Garam Garam Zero, Neeraj Bhai Hero is and was the whole theme of the first week of the games because, like I said, Neeraj Chopra was everywhere, PV Sindhu was everywhere, and the athletes themselves, those who were competing, looked kind of in a vacation mode. I mean, the day before the games, I went to this Thali restaurant and I couldn't have ever imagined that tennis players just before their match or just on the eve of their match would be feasting on a Gujarati Thali. Same with shooters, although into shooters, you don't really expect them to follow a strict diet anyway. I know some people will be pointing their guns at me, no puns intended, but that is the case more or less. So yeah, for Neeraj and Sindhu, it became a grueling outing. For the athletes who were competing, it was as good as a vacation.
Wow. My best part out of all the stories that you've just told is the one at the IIT campus, possibly one of the few times where the IITians present at the campus wouldn't have been the most important people on the campus. So that's brilliant. But let's just move on. And going forward, because you mentioned one thing before we went into the Neeraj Cam illustrations while this pod. You mentioned about the venues and the fact that this was held across 6 cities. And added to the fact that this was held and organized in such a short span of time, there must have been places where you would thought that, okay, yes, this is where the organization is a bit tough in such a strict timeline, in such a narrow window, especially with events such as triathlon, which were moved from the Sabarmati River to basically a swimming pool. What was that story about, and how did that happen, and when did that happen? How long before the games began?
Right. So, credit where due, actually. Most of the venues that the organizers selected, they were pretty cool. They were all pretty spotless, well planned, everything. But then again, you got to understand that these games were being held in a city which has almost zero history in Olympic sports. There are no major champions in usual Olympic disciplines that have emerged out of Gujarat. And as a consequence, the technical capacity is quite limited. Before we move into the issue of Sabarmati River, I mean, just a couple of examples if we were to cite. At the shooting range, for example, position from where the shooters take their aim at the target, the platform over there has to be of a certain level. It has to be, the platform basically has to give the shooters complete stability so that they don't shake or move while taking the aim. And the organizers apparently were told that, look, you have to refurbish all venues. So they just went ahead and redid the entire flooring of the shooting hall. And when they did that, they did it जैसे अपने घर पे flooring होते हैं वो, which isn't really ideal for shooting. So when the shooters reached the range, they found that they weren't able to balance themselves properly. They were just going left to right, tilting left to right while taking aims. So at the last minute, they had to do, you remember those green colored rubber sheets which are everywhere? They had to lay those rubber sheets from one end of the auditorium to the another just so that they would remain stable while taking shots. These kind of small things, you could see them practically at almost every venue. And that was one thing where you could see that jaldi jaldi mein thoda ho gaya. The bigger issue actually was the one that you mentioned, Sabarmati River. Now, triathlon, it's not a sport where Indians excel, but it's an interesting sport. It's a damn fun sport if you follow it closely. Now, triathlon has three elements to it. It has cycling, it has running, and it has swimming. Swimming in open waters. What the organizers over here thought is कि आपके पास Sabarmati River है, which has a stunning backdrop. It would have been ideal for triathlon, not just because of the backdrop, but because it is in close proximity to the road, to a promenade where running and cycling can be held. So, in all senses, it was a perfect venue. The problem was that in July, when they proposed Sabarmati Riverfront as the venue for a triathlon, they had to conduct tests on the water. And the Ahmedabad Municipal Corporation did that. And they found that the water quality was extremely poor. One official from the Gujarat State Olympic Association said that it was unhygienic and probably infectious if anyone was to swim in it. In July, this happened. The organizers were hopeful that once it rains, the water washes away, the dirty water will be replaced by clean water, and things will be okay by September. But in all, they conducted three tests, and the last one was in the first week of September. All three tests revealed that the quality of water is extremely poor to hold swimming events over there. And then it reached a stage where they had to drop the venue because Gujarat does not have other open water sources where swimming events could be held, much like the rest of India, until the Triathlon Federation came up with this idea of holding the event in IIT Gandhinagar and use the indoor swimming pool. Not ideal, but they did manage to get it done.
It's quite the story in itself. And for those who would want to read the entire piece from Mihir, do head on to the Indian Express website. But moving forward, as far as the games were concerned, even before they began, the IOA had made it mandatory for the athletes to participate in these games. The games were being held after 7 years. So, yeah, you could possibly think that they would want it to be on a big scale with the big names participating in the several events. Of course, for table tennis, the competition began even before the opening ceremony because they had to leave for the World Championships. Shooting also has its World Championship event. This one, of course, with Olympic quotas in the offering. So, as far as all these events, the several sports were concerned, how much seriousness did you gauge on the athletes' part? How important were these games for them in terms of their preparation, maybe say for World Championship, for the Olympic Games, and for the Asian Games that are to come?
Not a lot. I was there, admittedly, for the first week of the games, and most of the athletes we spoke to, there wasn't a lot of seriousness. So, in weightlifting, the idea was just to ensure they don't get injured. Mirabai Chanu, in fact, very surprisingly, competed despite of an injury. She had injured her left wrist while training, and the MRI scans, she said, had shown that it was because of overload of her training and weights that she was lifting. For Mirabai, it was, I mean, it didn't make sense for her to compete because she'll compete in the World Championships in December and she has to be fit for that when it's an Olympic qualifying event. But yeah, you could see that she did not make much of an effort, even though she won the gold medal. She did not make her complete quota of 3 lifts. She was content with 2 lifts in each, the snatch and clean and jerk categories. That was in weightlifting. If you move to track and field with the triple jumper Praveen Chitravel, he won the gold medal there. And immediately after he won the gold, he was like, look, this is just a training session for me. It's end of the season. I don't want to push myself, risk any injuries. So I'm taking it easy. Shooters were kind of just going through the motions because they'll be competing the world championships in a week, like you mentioned. And the list goes on and on, yeah. And let's be honest though, there were some stories for some people for whom these games were very important. And one of them, Rahul, if you can just take us through the story, Andrew Amson, our colleague, did a story on the Manrega worker who struck gold, wasn't it?
Yep, definitely one of the big stories from these games. And so Ram Babu from Bahuara village in UP, Sonbhadra, made the national records in race walking at these games. The new record of 2 hours, 36 minutes and 32 seconds in the 35-kilometer race walk was not just the highlight for his 2022 season, but yeah, as I say, possibly the highlight of these national games. The fact that his background, the fact that his struggles over the last few years have been just incredible. I mean, Andrew has covered it all in his story, of course, at the Indian Express website, where basically Ram Babu shares how his days of manual labor and his days of working as a waiter in Varanasi pushed him to this point where he went on to become a national record holder in 2018. I think it was when he realized that he needed to fund himself, fund his own dreams of becoming an athlete, and did mention how during the lockdown he worked under the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, where he had to dig up soil for various village projects. Now, they would give him measurements in the area where he would be assigned work, and it was a daily wage job and a class 7 dropout, basically, with parents who own no land and work as laborers. For him to go on and claim the national record in 2022, I think that's the kind of story possibly the organizers and possibly the sporting community would have thought of. I think there's a bit of an emotional part in the story where he mentions how he did not did not like working as a waiter because of how he was treated at the places where he worked, called different names, and there wasn't time for his preparation of the sport, is what he mentions. When he used to work up as a waiter, he would work from the morning to late night and then wake up early for his running practice. So basically, there was also no time for his recovery, the body recovery during that time period. But that story, of course, took a big turn in 2018 when he found army coach Basant Rana, who had represented India at the 2012 London Olympics in the 50-kilometer event. And this was, no, beg your pardon, this was after the Tokyo Olympics that he found coach Basant Rana. And he helped them in the sense that this, during the pandemic time, Rana would share videos of several workouts to him on WhatsApp. And there's a pretty important line which Ram mentions in his interview, in his piece, in Andrew's piece, that he trained alone, but under coach Basant Rana's guidance. Yeah, I mean, incredible to see what he has achieved at these games, and possibly, yeah, as I say, the feature story of this piece, of these games. And as far as the medals tally is concerned, Mihir, what's the standing as of now? How are the states doing? Who have been the big winners as a state and as teams at these games, and who have not been the big winners at these games?
Look, we are recording this on Thursday, and there's still quite a lot to go before these games end. But as things stand now, Services Sports Control Board are way ahead of Haryana and Maharashtra, who are at number 2 and 3, possibly. There might be some change in medals total by the time the games end, but it won't really matter much because services are way ahead of the rest. But I mean, this, I don't know, is of how much significance. It will be more important to see whether they, as in the IOA, the Indian Olympic Association, can host the games again next year on schedule. This time there was a political will, so they could get in. I'm more interested to see if it becomes a regular affair. But we are very short on time, Rahul, and very quickly, I'd like to get our producer Shashank Bhargav in over here before we close for today and just get a sense from him because Shashank, national games isn't something that happens every year. Did it even register to you that they were taking place?
No, I mean, I wouldn't say it registered very prominently. Like, I read the newspaper every day, so I got to know it through that. But none of the people around me even mentioned it, knew it was happening. So, yeah, it was not really on my radar. But your stories that I read were very insightful, especially the problems that the athletes were facing, and just they had other stuff on their mind. They had other championships to go to sometime, and they weren't exactly taking this seriously. So the whole thing just, I guess, raises a lot of concerns for me.
And sir, काफी backhanded compliment था वहां पर, because you said कि हमने stories भी अच्छी की, and the same time you said it didn't register properly, so कहीं ना कहीं हम चूक गए उसमें. But well, I think I'll leave it at that. Shashank, you'll always, as always, have the last word. And it was, yeah, that's it, I guess. Rahul, और तो कुछ हमारे पास add करने के लिए है नहीं. And the Zoom link here is just counting down, ticking down like a time bomb. So without wasting much time, we'll end this over here, and we'll be back again next week with a brand new episode. Hopefully, looking at the T20 World Cup if it's not too early for that. If it is, we'll leave it for next week. But we'll be back next week regardless. Take care. Bye bye.
You were listening to Express Sports by the Indian Express. This week's show was edited and mixed by Abhishek Kumar and produced by me, Shashank Bhargav. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it, share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Audio and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.